Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we're going to be taking a look at 10 different young NHL players disappointing everyone so far this year and having super disappointing seasons. Now, in the youth age right now in the NHL, there's a ton of young players out there, year by year, getting better and better, but that's not always the case when it comes to these young prospects and these young players. Sometimes they'll have so much potential, so much promise, and then the next year just disappoint everybody. And today we're going to be looking at the 10 most extreme examples of disappointing young players so far this year. So who do I see as the most disappointing young players in the NHL this season, and which disappointing young players make today's top 10? Watch till the end for the entire top 10 and the entire rankings, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. 60% of the people that are watching the videos are not subscribed, so every bit helps, and hit that subscribe button for more hockey content almost daily, just like this. Now, to start us off today with the first disappointing young player that's really been disappointing everyone this year, especially me, going from a guy that I thought could win the Vezina Trophy this year to a guy that's been on the completely different side of the spectrum. We're going to start out at number 1 and go to Philadelphia Flyers starter Carter Hart. Now, picking him to win the Vezina Trophy, not one of my finest moments, that's for sure. But after a .926 save percentage in the playoffs, I thought he would transition some of that onto this season. But he has an .877 save percentage this year, a -24 goals saved above expected, which is the worst in the league. The only one that comes close is Jonas Korpisalo of -18. That's how bad Carter Hart has been. And at the start, he was bad, but some of it was because of the defense. But as the season wore on, he just got worse and worse, and had to leave the last couple of weeks because of an absence, and Philadelphia wanted him away, and then he had NCL sprain, and he's out for the year. Just a horrendous year for Carter Hart. I think he will be okay eventually, but certainly not the season that I or anybody else was expecting from a potential Vezina winning goaltender. Now, moving on to the second young disappointing player so far this year that's just disappointing everybody, including me. We're going to go to a guy that's also been compared quite a bit to Carter Hart and the potential timelines there. Going on to number 2, though, we're going to move on to the New Jersey Devils starter in Mackenzie Blackwood. Now, on paper, Mackenzie Blackwood hasn't been terrible this year. He has a .902 save percentage in 32 games played, which, considering the Devils roster on paper, does not look half bad, and it doesn't. But when you watch the games, and especially in terms of goals saved above expected, which of course factors in defense and scoring opportunities and quality of shots, Mackenzie Blackwood finishes 5th last among starters with a -13. Although he's been a lot better than Carter Hart this year, it's not really much of a difference, and it's not like Mackenzie Blackwood has been amazing either. I think the main difference is just those crazy games where New Jersey last year would give up like 45, 50 shots, but Mackenzie Blackwood would somehow try to steal the game and somehow get a point from that. This year, it hasn't quite been that same way, and even though the save percentage is still all right, Mackenzie Blackwood, I think, has definitely taken a step back in terms of stealing games from New Jersey. He's still been all right, but I think definitely has some more fuel left in the tank. But especially compared to what I thought Mackenzie Blackwood could be this year, it's been a super disappointing campaign, but here's hoping next year is a completely different story. But now moving on to the third disappointing player this year that's just been on a different level in terms of decline defensively in his overall game. A guy that I thought should have won the Calder Trophy last year and was amazing last year, to a guy that's just been sometimes an anchor on his defense. We're now going to move on to the Vancouver Canucks number 1 D-man, number 3 in Quinn Hughes. Now, Quinn Hughes has been frustrating this year, to put it as lightly as I can ever possibly put it. And even though points-wise he's still pretty good at 35 points in 45 games, he's just a different player this year from last year. Last year, in the Calder Trophy year, I saw a guy that, on top of his great offensive creativity and skating and IQ, he defensively, I thought, was pretty underrated in terms of getting the puck on his stick and not making the crazy play, but using his skating, using his offensive agility to get out of the zone quite cleanly and escape defensive pressure. He really didn't need to play that much defense because he always had the puck in the defensive zone and his skating was as good as it was. But this year, it's a drastic contrast. This year, he just looks lost out there defensively. He doesn't even know what to do with the puck, even when he does end up getting it. And I think the main thing that happened was Chris Tanev leaving to the Vancouver Canucks. Or to the Calgary Flames. If he never left in free agency, I think Quinn Hughes would be having another great year, and we wouldn't talk about him having this sharp decline that he has this season. season. I think Chris Tanev was the rock on the other side where he could kind of make a mistake or two sometimes and get away with it, but still had the confidence to use his skating, and almost every single time would end up working because he had the confidence and because he had the talent to do so. This year, the confidence isn't there, and it's all kind of fallen apart. With Chris Tanev to the Flames, who's also been great this year for the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks are definitely hurting that department, and honestly, it hurts them a lot more than Jacob Markstrom or even Tyler Toffoli almost leaving in free agency. But we're going to end up advancing on to the fourth disappointing young player this season that's been disappointing everybody, including myself, going from a guy that had an amazing second half and not really translating it to this season. We're going to move on to the Edmonton Oilers top six winger and go on to Kailer Yamamoto. Now, Kailer Yamamoto is an interesting one to me. 26 points in 27 games last year with Leon Draisaitl was absolutely amazing on that line, and it was a big reason why the Oilers were so strong heading into those play-ins. But this year, it hasn't quite been the same way. Now, I didn't expect him to keep that points per game going, but I expected him to be around 35, maybe even 40 points in a 56-game year, be around that respectable rate on his second line. But this year just hasn't been the case. 20 points in 47 games played. He's played a decent chunk with guys like Connor McDavid and guys like Leon Draisaitl this year, but just hasn't had the same production. He still has some of the skill and some of the speed, but the luck has not been on his side completely. Now, I've seen also speculated out there that he might be injured, and I think that would explain quite a bit, because it seems like his shot and just his overall finesse and finishing just has not quite been there with guys like Leon Draisaitl and McDavid this year. I think Yamamoto will still be fine. He's still 22 years old and is still a very energetic, very high-paced, speedy forward, but it's obvious that we need to tone back the hype a little bit. He's not going to be as good as he was in the second half of last year, and he's probably going to be about in the middle. He'll be back, though, next year, I think, and hopefully back to 100% hockey. Now, we're going to end up moving on to the fifth disappointing young player this season that's been disappointing everybody, including myself. Going to a guy that I thought had a pretty sharp decline last year, but an even sharper decline this year, not just in terms of the production, but the actual play on the ice. We're going to end up moving to number 5 and go to the new Detroit Red Wings captain in Dylan Larkin. Now, Dylan Larkin is a frustrating one, that's for sure. 23 points in 44 games this year after having 53 in 71 last year, I believe. And when it comes to Dylan Larkin, just the points totals themselves, ever since 2019, where he had 73 points in 76 games, it just has gotten worse and worse and worse. And obviously, Detroit is not a fantastic team, and obviously Anthony Mantha also being traded has not helped them, and him not having a great year has also not helped that. But Dylan Larkin, in terms of the on-ice play, I think has also had his worst year in quite a little bit. And again, not just in terms of the offense, but the defense especially, which I thought had a sharp decline from just a decent amount of defense from the years prior. Dylan Larkin is a guy, though, that I think will eventually be fine, but his first year as the captain for Detroit did not go as planned whatsoever. He definitely needs to be a lot better, take account for how bad he's been lately, and definitely needs to be the number one center that Detroit needs right now. I mean, they don't have anybody else that I think will eventually fill that role. They haven't drafted anybody that could eventually fill that role. Dylan Larkin needs to be that guy, though, and needs to be that number one captain that Detroit can actually depend upon, because especially in his first season, that was far from the case. But now going on to number 6, and the 6th very disappointing young player so far this year. We're going to move to a guy that I think should have made some bigger strides in terms of the overall game especially. Kind of the same profile as Quinn Hughes in terms of his overall game this year. We're now going to move on to Ottawa Senators number 1 D-man and number 6, and go on to Thomas Chabot. Now again, just like Quinn Hughes, the statistical profile isn't half bad. 31 points in 45 games on the Ottawa Senators is a very good clip for a young defenseman. But I think when it comes to Thomas Chabot, the overall game that we see should be much better than what it is right now. He's 24 years old, right in the prime of his career, or at least starting to get into that prime of his career, and he should be the number 1 defenseman for Ottawa. And even though obviously offensively is his bread and butter, and we've seen that obviously these past couple of years really be at a good level, I think Thomas Chabot should be more than that personally, especially with Ottawa's young defense right now. I think defensively there's just some massive black holes in his game, and he doesn't have to be this amazing defenseman or anything, but he's just been on a poor level all season. And even though it has gotten better, I think in the second half, Thomas Chabot should be better defensively, and I think he's a big reason why the Ottawa Senators, at least defensively, aren't a better team. He eats a ton of minutes, and especially defensively, doesn't have much to show for it. But now going on to number 7, and the 7th disappointing young player. They're disappointing a ton of people, but especially me this year, sadly. Going to a guy that's so frustrating, and I once considered one of the top prospects in the league. Still a young prospect, though. We're going to move on to number 7 and go on to the Vegas Golden Knights' top prospect in Cody Glass. Now, Cody Glass is an interesting one to me. Points-wise, not too terrible. 10 points in 27 games this year. But in terms of the actual play on the ice, he was pretty much a non-factor when he played for the Vegas Golden Knights this year. And he was one of the few players that could get sent down to the AHL and the NHL and still not have to go through waivers on that roster. So he eventually got sent down to the AHL where he's playing now and has kind of just been fine there. He's been good, hasn't been spectacular or anything, but he's 22 years old, was amazing in the WHL, still has amazing talent. He needs to be dominant in the NHL and actually prove himself at the NHL level. Vegas is a team that has so many quality options. If you're not worth the roster spot, Vegas shouldn't give it to you. Cody Glass, simply put, needs to prove himself worthy of that spot. He did not do it last season. He did not do it this year, and especially with the potential middle 6 center spots that were open, this was supposed to be the year that Cody Glass got it done, but unfortunately, it did not. I don't want to rant too long about a 22-year-old player because he is still 22, but it's super frustrating to go from an amazing top prospect to a guy that just can't even crack a bottom 6. But now we're going to move on to the 8th disappointing young player this year, going from a guy that I thought had a career season last year to a season where he's been one of the most underwhelming defenseman in the league. We're going to move on to the Philadelphia Flyers' number 1 D-man. Another reason, like Hart, why the Flyers have not been great this year. Going on to Ivan Provorov. Ivan Provorov is one of the most frustratingly inconsistent defensemen out there. Last year, I thought he had a career year in terms of eye test. I loved his decent overall game, but the offense and the skating and the overall IQ that I thought definitely improved, I thought was a big factor as to why he got that extension, why Philadelphia was a solid team last year, and especially in the playoffs where I thought his maturity level was at a pretty good rate. This year, though, that's pretty much all come crashing down. The offense hasn't been terrible by any means, but the defense has been among the league's worst. And for a guy still that young, obviously, there's still a lot of potential there. But after getting that lengthy extension and being the number 1 guy for Philadelphia consistently, Provorov has definitely needed to be better, and if he is better, I expect Philadelphia to be a lot better next season. But now we're going to move on to the 9th disappointing young player this year. Unlike Ivan Provorov, has not had a breakout year by any means, but unfortunately still is waiting for that breakout year, especially after this year. We're going to move on to the Anaheim Ducks' once upon a time top prospect in Sam Steele. One of the most interesting and frustrating young prospects out there. He's now 23 years old, and I thought this year was going to be the year that he finally took that next step in the NHL, got it all, reached it within himself, and finally established himself as an NHL player. But it's been far from the truth this year. 12 points in 39 games played is not the worst thing in the world still. But the play on the ice has been lackluster, to say the least. A constant amount of turnovers. It's like turnover city whenever he's out there on the ice. His IQ plays have been a little bit disappointing this year, and you can kind of see the skill still within himself. He'll show kind of some flashes in different spurts within the games he plays, but just the actual play on the ice, keeping the puck, and actually doing anything with it is a difficult thing for him in the NHL. And even though he's been all right in the AHL over these past couple of years, he's never taken that next step that he should have, and he's now 23 years old. Time is ticking for him to actually get to that level and actually start producing. There's a lot of excuses that Sam Steele can put out, but he just needs to be better, simply put. Now, we're going to go on to number 10, the 10th disappointing young player this year. We're going to talk about not really being as good as they should, and especially considering the team that this player is on and the position they're in, this player needs to be better. And we're talking about needs to be better, especially come playoff time. Going on to the 10th young player that's disappointed so far this year, we're going to go to a guy that I don't see getting enough bad talk for how just poor he's been. We're going to go on to 26-year-old defenseman Josh Morrissey. Now, I know you might be thinking, he is the number 1 defenseman on the Winnipeg Jets, who overall this year have not been bad whatsoever. But when you actually watch Josh Morrissey on the ice, there is some major flaws that I don't think people are talking about. At age 26, Josh Morrissey is having one of the worst overall years I've ever seen him play. Whether that be in the juniors, whether that be in the NHL, whatever it might be. Offensively, he hasn't been terrible. He's been okay. But defensively, he's been among the NHL's worst D-men this year. In almost everything. In terms of puck protection, in terms of defensive pressure, in terms of turnovers. It's been terrible. Getting it out of the zone is a constant struggle. And the thing is, Josh Morrissey's been playing as the #1 guy for Winnipeg, not just this year, but for a while. But it's obvious he's not a #1 defenseman. If he was playing on a second pairing, at number 4 minutes, or even number 3 minutes, I think Josh Morrissey will be talked about a lot more kindly. The problem is he's flush into this #1 position on a Winnipeg Jets team defensively that's already super young, not that experienced, and doesn't eat that many minutes. Josh Morrissey has been put in a terrible position and has not played well whatsoever. In some ways, I kind of feel bad for him, but he's making a ton of money. He's on the Winnipeg Jets, who could be a great team this year in the playoffs, but he definitely needs to be better defensively. That's a big reason why I think Winnipeg hasn't been as good as they maybe could be, is because of some of the maturity on that defense. But I think Josh Morrissey is a big reason why, and I think in terms of the talent level, should be better than what he's shown so far this year. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments down below what do you agree and disagree with my picks, and who do you think has been the most disappointing young player on your favorite NHL team and in the NHL league-wide. Let me know all your thoughts. Make sure you share this video out there with all your friends. Get the disappointing young players out there in the rankings as well, and click on this card for all my hockey prospects to talk right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully have an amazing day. Release the Kraken. You know how it be. And I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.